You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by a Rail Volution one-to-one conversation. That's right. This week, Mesa, Arizona City Council member Francisco Heredia talks with Charlotte City Council member Braxton Winston about the challenges and opportunities their cities face related to transportation. It's a great discussion, so I hope you all enjoy it. It's originally was posted on the Rail Volution podcast. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll do a really, really short news section and then get to their discussion, which I found really interesting, and I hope you all like it. Well, this is episode 93, Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. I'm not sure if we're shut in anymore, but that's okay. We'll just continue with this because I think it says something about me. But before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts, even though they're being really bad about updating their app. Their app really is bad. I can't believe it is, and I keep complaining about it, but they don't listen. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. Also, thanks to the folks who subscribe through podcatchers. It's awesome you guys keep coming back to the show, and we really, really do appreciate it, so thank you so much. Okay, let's start with the news, and then we'll get to Francisco and Braxton discussing transportation between each other. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. Here are a few items before we get to the discussion. So let's see here. They paved over paradise, but we can reverse it. In the discussion of freeway teardowns and reconnecting neighborhoods, one piece has been underemphasized, reducing the amount of paved asphalt cities contained. Extensive pavement cover in cities induces heat, runoff, and other negative externalities. That's by Mary Pat McGuire in Next City. So I think this is something that we don't think about enough, but in the amount of pavement that we have in cities is immense. And there's so many negative externalities. I remember when I was in Austin, that was one of the big things that we discussed was the paving over the Edwards Aquifer and trying to get as much impervious cover as possible so that the water could seep in. And that was a major discussion in the environmental movement there. But I don't hear it talked about as much. I mean, I guess in Philadelphia, they're doing some stuff that's kind of interesting related to stormwater management and gray infrastructure, trying to get rid of the gray infrastructure and putting more green infrastructure with pervious pavements and things like that, but I haven't really heard much about it. So I hope that we talk about it more, and I hope that Mary Pat McGuire's piece kind of spurs some of that as well. But we talked to Zabe Bent about this briefly in our chat that's coming up on Talking Headways in a couple of weeks, and I just sorted out a review copy from the University of Nebraska Press on this book called Asphalt: A History, which I'm really looking forward to reading. So I'm sure that we'll continue this topic of talking about pervious cover, impervious cover, asphalt, the concrete that we cover our cities in, and what we need to do to kind of reduce the impacts of that. Okay, aging condos need better oversight. The condominium collapse in Seaside, Florida illuminates a broader worry starting to emerge. Many condo buildings constructed in the 1970s and 1980s will soon reach the end of their useful life and need extensive retrofits. But people who live in the buildings have fought back against rising condo fees instead of focusing on building safety and competent management. Better oversight could go a long way. This is by Peter Coy in the Bloomberg Business Week. There's also, I think, a City Lab article about the same thing. It's really important to talk about this because I think that we often think about tall buildings as something that we build and then they just are there forever. But they actually have issues if they aren't repaired and if they aren't maintained very well. And the result is what happened in Florida. I mean, obviously, there's some other things related to that where there's an alleged misengineering portion of that where they might not have put the amount of steel rods that they needed. There's also a sinking soil issue. But here are the 3 important things that I think about this condo situation specifically. The first thing is whether the condo boards are focused more on saving people from monthly fees or from themselves. And I think that if we can get people to save them from themselves, that'd be really great. Obviously, nobody wants to pay extra fees, taxes, and those types of things, but a lot of times they're beneficial. And in this case, paying your condo fees, and even though it's going to be really expensive for maintenance, that's the reason why. And there was a suggestion, I can't remember where it was, but there was a suggestion that developers should actually set up a pot of money initially for repairs down the road. And it might increase the condo fees, but it would be a leap ahead in terms of having that money available if you ever did need to make these fixes. And one of the things that's a problem with that to a certain extent might be the way that people want to steal from it or take from it, even in the best of terms. Maybe they want to do some painting of the building, or maybe they want to do some elaborate water feature. I don't know, but there's got to be something that tags that pot of money just for maintenance of the structure itself, because then you have a situation where the structure itself might fall down in the future. You don't want to have that. The second thing is climate change is going to be a big driver of this in places like Miami and on the coasts. Shifting soil, sinking soil, and water inundation are only going to get worse. So, one of the things that I think buildings, have a worry about is their foundations. And here in San Francisco specifically, we have piles driven way deep into the bedrock now because new buildings, they have to worry about earthquakes. And, people are worried about what happens if you have an earthquake and the building kind of sways or falls over. And there, obviously, we have really strict earthquake standards and building standards, but there's some issues where if you don't do that, it gets really, really shaky, literally. So something to think about is rising sea level and climate change effects as well. And then finally, do cities need condo oversight and inspection to be more frequent and more stringent? This seems to be important if we're going to have to avoid this happening again. Maybe it's a state thing, maybe it's a city thing, maybe it's even a federal thing. I'm not quite sure, but there needs to be some sort of oversight that's even more robust than maybe what is existing now. The Department of Building Inspection in a lot of these places, and they did some emergency checks on a lot of these buildings after the collapse of the initial one, and they found that other buildings were in danger as well. So there's something there that needs to be fixed in terms of the inspection and making sure that it goes. Now, the building that fell down, they actually found out that they had this problem and they were going to fix it at some point, but they delayed maybe a bit too long and something big and bad happened, unfortunately. So something interesting to think about, those three items that I mentioned. Also, there's been a lot of articles and things written about this, and I think it's really interesting, especially as we're focused on building more buildings, building more density, building more condos and high-rises and things, and the structure of that really is interesting. Okay, so last one. Urban Mobility Report is back and still missing the point. Each year, Texas Transportation Institute makes a list of the most congested cities according to their metrics, but it focuses on auto travel and speed despite constant critiques. During the pandemic, traffic decreased a bit, but congestion decreased a lot. But you won't hear the details of why from researchers at TTI. This was by Joe Courtwright, one of our friends who was on the show talking about freeways a few weeks ago. And finally, my story that I've told many times about Tim Lomax, who's one of the authors of the TTI report. He told me once at CNU that my trip on BART really didn't matter, even though I was never really seeing any roadway congestion. So I wasn't contributing to it, but I guess I wasn't helping either. So from that interaction with him, I was just kind of like, it's all BS and focused on highway expansion, roadways, and those types of things. They really don't seem to care about the other things that matter. Freeway speed seems to be all it is. So cities that have fast freeway speeds seem to be the least congested, which doesn't make any sense to me, because there's obviously another measure that we're starting to think about way more, which may or may not be the best one, but who knows, is access. So talking about access is really important, and we've been doing that a lot on the show. Something to think about when you read these newspaper articles. It's like, oh, X is the most congested city ever, or X is not the most congested city this year, even though it was last year. It's just a rating system. It's a way for them to get in the newspapers. Gloria Oland, who's a good friend who used to work on the Surface Transportation Policy Project, said that was the best way to get the attention of the newspapers, was rank their cities against other ones. And I think that's probably the case here. So they haven't changed their metrics. They haven't changed anything about it to try to, get with the times of thinking in terms of traffic and transportation congestion. So maybe we should bin it overall. Okay, and that's it for the news. Next up, Mesa City Council member Francisco Heredia, and Charlotte City Council member Braxton Winston discussed transportation and going from advocates to elected leaders. This episode was first on the Rail Volution podcast and produced by Rail Volution and edited by The Overhead Wire. For more on this fall's virtual Rail Volution conference, go to railvolution.org. I hope you enjoy this discussion between Francisco Heredia and Charlotte City Council member Braxton Winston. We'll be back after their discussion.
So Councilmember Francisco Heredia, born and raised in Arizona, Southern Arizona, really rooted in my parents' kind of background. They immigrated from Mexico in the late 60s and early 70s to work as farm workers. And they began as migrant farm workers traveling from Arizona to California. And then they settled in a small town about 5 minutes from the Arizona-Mexican border. And my mom got a job as a cafeteria worker and worked 30 years at a local public school elementary. And my dad as a cement truck driver and tractor driver, various different jobs after he left the fields there. And so that really roots me into the hard work and perseverance that they had in their story of why they came to this country to pursue the American dream for their kids. And for me, that's really been the impetus to really work towards community and how do we build a voice in the community and garner that voice to keep elected officials accountable. And now being myself an elected official, being in the systems that really can create change around policy is definitely a passion for me. Been engaged in social justice movements here in Arizona. For a long time, I led organizations and coalitions in Arizona working around immigration reform, around policy issues that affect our neighborhoods, like transit options, increasing those options for our residents, having healthcare and educational options for our community. Those have been really a prominent aspect for my advocacy in the past. And now as a council member in the city of Mesa, really has been interesting and really a positive reflection for me to see how we can really delve into those issues and create some systemic changes moving forward in a positive way for our community members. So that's a little bit about me. I have 3 young children, 2 boys and a baby girl who's 4 years old. I received my master's in public administration. And for me, those experiences really, along with the work that I've done, really shaped me. The city of Mesa, it's the 3rd largest city in the state. We're in the Phoenix metro area. We're about 500,000 individuals here, residents that live in the city. It's a growing city with sprawl, but also our internal core where our transit options are is building more density towards the future. So that's kind of where Mesa's at. If folks know Arizona, Maricopa County, one of the largest counties in the country. We're kind of a suburb of the Phoenix area, but still, a growing city that we have really interesting challenges and things to look forward to.
Well, thank you. Thank y'all for having me. My name is Braxton Winston. I am a at-large city council member in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am in the middle of my 2nd term in office. We have 2-year terms here in Charlotte. And I was first elected in 2017. And I really got involved during the prior year in my city civically after the death of Keith Lamont Scott by Charlotte Mecklenburg police officers. As they were serving a warrant on somebody else, they saw Mr. Scott and suspected him of needing to intervene as he was waiting for his kids to get off the bus for school. And that incident, I kind of bear witness to the aftermath at the crime scene as that investigation turned into a protest, and as the protests really devolved into violence and about a week-long uprising here in Charlotte. During that week, I kind of found myself literally on the front lines, right where citizens and our police officers were kind of butting heads. So from that, I really got thrust into the spotlight as a leader, and I made a commitment, that I wanted to be part of not just acknowledging what I saw wrong in the system, but being part of the change. And so I approached that activism work, really the work period, from a 3-pronged perspective. Citizen journalism, where I was showing up to events, showing up to actions, whether they be protests, city council meetings, committee meetings around planning, and using social media to disseminate facts objectively to folks. What I saw is that people were interested in these conversations around underlying issues that lead to inequitable neighborhoods and therefore the inequitable effect of systems on individuals and groups of people. So when I showed up, I like I said, I used that citizen journalism aspect to bring people along to inform them so they can determine their own truth. From doing that, I was able to build a platform it allowed me the privilege and the responsibility of amplifying other people's voices. And I think that's what activism means, when you amplify voices that don't have the same platform as you. But, I graduated from Davidson College. It's a liberal arts school down here in Charlotte with a BA in anthropology. So I look at things from a historic and a cultural lens, how we do what we do. And I realize that we are a culture of laws and policies. So we can organize person to person, but if we don't change the laws and policies, then we're not going to get real change. So I was really looking to push new people forward, new leaders that I saw out in the street forward. But as I was being invited to other rooms and to the tables, it was becoming obvious to people and myself, if not me, then who, if not now, then when. So I decided to run the next year for that office. And I created a platform. My challenge was not to be pigeonholed into just dealing with police community relations. So I built a platform based on 3 principles: equity, access, and interconnection. And that access was both physical as well as digital. But the physical aspect was very important. Look, I grew up in New York City. I was the rare New York City family that did have a vehicle in the household, but it wasn't very usable. It was part of my father's work vehicle. So I grew up riding public transportation, cabs, taxis. It wasn't anything. But when I moved down here to Charlotte, when I took the bus somewhere, the looks that I got from my friends and peers and people close to me was like, are you okay? Are you in a crisis? Why would you ride the bus? And then looking at some of the effects of planning and the way our map is laid out, you see that if you lived in certain parts of town in Charlotte, you can't physically get to different parts of town. And that's not a good thing for the 15th largest city in the nation, a city that is growing by, some people say, 1,000 people a week. And each one of those people are bringing something like 1.6 cars with them. That is not sustainable. So access to not just transit, but a transportation network is something that immediately jumped out to me in addressing the issues that were brought up in the uprising of 2016. It has been central to the work that I've been trying to push policy-wise over the past almost 3 years. I can tell you, Charlotte exists in the legacy of redlining. It exists, in urban renewal policies. The plans were laid out in the late 40s, but, it took to the 60s and 70s to be implemented fully. But we exist in a type of what we call the crescent and the wedge, a wedge of economic wealth surrounded by a crescent of folks that have not been able to benefit largely from the economic growth that we have here in Charlotte. We're one of the most segregated cities because of that. And that's segregated by wealth, by ethnicities, by race, by access to education, access to transportation. Even our bus system was once kind of revolutionary for its time. We have a hub and spoke system that is being re-envisioned to a more of a grid. But that hub and spoke system was utilized to get people from the neighborhoods where they lived to the rich neighborhoods where they would have to go and work. And therefore, now you don't really have the type of connectivity that is needed for the type of city that we are right now. So this is something that we are wrestling with. Those neighborhoods that have not seen the economic generation over time, those are also the places that have been cut off by the building of highways and our interstate system throughout the last half of the 20th century. So we are in the process of developing a strategic mobility plan that kind of looks to not just create new neighborhoods, but hopefully restore and repair some of the harm that has been done by the way we've developed in our city over the past 100 years.
Yeah, and for us, City of Mesa, how I explain our city is kind of 2 halves. You have your West Mesa, where I'm a council member for District 3, which covers a lot of the western part of the city. And then you have your eastern part, where it's a newer part of Mesa. It's definitely growing in its development. But in our parts on the west side, it's where we have a lot of the transit options. We have older infrastructure, and a lot of the diversity is there in Mesa, where we have about 30% of the population in the city is Latino, which is in mostly West Mesa. And so, as Councilmember Winston mentioned, the dynamics in Charlotte, Mesa has some of the similar dynamics interplaying here in how we look into those areas for the future and building options for folks to go to work, to go to school, to go to a restaurant, and ensuring that they have options on traveling is going to be important in how we set up our infrastructure. Here in Mesa, we're lucky to work with entities like Valley Metro, who as a region in Maricopa County work together in establishing those transit options, where we've over the last 20 years invested into a regional approach around light rail, where the city of Mesa has had light rail come through its downtown portion of the city, which covers most of the west side. But when you look at the east side, we just don't have the transit options that people might need as it further develops. And so we have a distinct challenge in how do we interconnect people back into our urban cores, both the city of Mesa, but also our region. And so that's going to be conversations that we're having as both a local city, but also a regional conversations on how we definitely expand those options to move people more freely. And I think a big topic of conversation has been the growth of autonomous vehicles, and how do we look in and how that interplays with the public transportation systems that we keep on adding and looking at those options. I think there's a misrepresentation based on some conversations that I've had, that autonomous vehicles will supplant public transportation. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we need to figure out how that works together for our residents and ensure that we use as many transit options for folks to utilize in the future. And that, plays into, the systems like light rail and streetcar and, bus rapid transit and other bus transit options, along with autonomous vehicles, and moving into a direction that we need to definitely look at interconnectedness between our city and as a region that we work with.
Council member, you mentioned light rail, right? And it's something that we're in the middle of right now. If I'm not mistaken, I feel like when we had our council retreat, we had your mayor, I believe, come and speak to us. And he mentioned about some issues around light rail funding, that there wasn't necessarily Mesa, but you guys have a sort of multi-county or multi-city region, and certain part of that region kind of killed, if not an entire light rail project, a part of it, right? Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
For sure. I think the metro line, the light rail line, it's only as good as we further develop it and connect different parts of our region. Like I mentioned, there's an entity called Valley Metro that coordinates the region, and how we look at adding extensions to that line. Right now, it's about 22 miles of light rail that cuts through predominantly three cities: city of Phoenix, which is the fifth largest city in the country; city of Tempe, which has the largest public universities, Arizona State University; and the city of Mesa. And it cuts through the various urban cores of those cities. And so as we looked at developing extensions to those lines so that we can connect different communities and have options for those communities, and working in conjunction with the core cities that have the metro line, we've run into roadblocks. One in particular city on the west side of our county voted to turn down an extension that would cut into their urban core. And that kind of put an influx of what do we have, moving forward. How do we create community that, wants and needs these public transit options, but the buy-in with these other parts of the region to see the benefits of having this type of transportation options for their residents. And so some folks, the conversation has revolved around budgets. It does cost a lot to create and maintain these options, but these options of adding light rail or streetcar, those things, I think the value of that is how we we connect people, right? And sometimes it's hard to place that value on that interconnectedness of moving people around to work and school and, to entertainment options and those kinds of things. So yeah, I think as we work as in regions, different cities have different priorities, and we need to really look into moving forward how those priorities can be aligned in these options as we expand. We have good planning pieces right now that we're just about in the next couple of years going to have a big vote on a regional wide kind of funding apparatus that voters will vote on to fund public transportation and public infrastructure around transit. And so that will give us for the next 20 years, or really if passed, a big boost around resources and planning on how do we extend this system where I think for the most part, we do want to extend, but again, we have to work with the 20 plus cities in the region and how we plan this work out for the next 20 years. So definitely interesting politics, right? Politics play into community. And, as you mentioned, that's the work that we as elected officials have to do to see how we work together and see the value of something like this that our communities can have for the future.
And I'm over here trying to get some cheat codes from you because here over here in Charlotte, we're in the design phase of our second light rail line. Our first light rail line just runs north to south, has been very successful in terms of generating development all along the corridor. But again, it's only one line, and that one line took 20 years to build in two different phases. So now we're looking at an east-west connector that is 26 miles long, but also has spurs that go into potentially the county to the east and the county to the west. But as we're thinking about this, we do think of ourselves, are increasingly trying to think of ourselves as not just a city, but, how do we impact and how do we move as a region? So, I know that we are going to have to go to places to figure out, how to generate, this revenue to make these billions of dollars of investment. So in order to do that, like you said, that is a big part of our job, to figure out how to build coalitions beyond our city hall and beyond our arbitrary boundaries and borders to get something like that done. And, that's one of the best parts of the work, but it's also one of the most difficult parts of it. I would imagine that Arizona is designed to be pretty car-centric, just like we are here. So it's really difficult to convince a born and bred Southerner, to be completely honest, that it's perfectly fine to ride a bus or a train and that you should want to pay taxes for that. So,
yeah, no, you're pointing to the difficulties, right? The resources part. Arizona, like you mentioned, Charlotte being car-centric. We are definitely a car-centric community, society here, based on the sprawl that we've had and just the investments in transit. Though we've worked in a regional capacity, we still have a lot of work to do to connect people. That's going to be the next challenge for the next 20 years for us to really see how we really work together, because no city can do it on its own, I feel, just based on the amount of resources that we need, the infrastructure, and just what it takes to connect people as you're working with larger region-based issues, right? And so, you alluded to the development that you've seen in some of the initial light rail, and for us, it took us about 20 years to be where we're at, and we're still a long way in moving forward. Other extensions and connecting points. And so, Council Member, could you talk a little bit about the developments that you've seen that line has added, and what in the future do you see even bigger developments or opportunities that might come in?
Yeah, well, so it's been a double-edged sword for us. So, like I said, we built this blue line. It took a long time to build, and then we didn't even build the whole thing at once. We built it in sections. And when we built the initial section, one of the compromises was honestly, and I'm reducing this conversation down, to a bite size, but there were politicians that pushed beyond when the voters initially rejected the idea of a rail line. But certain elected officials, bipartisan support, both Republicans and Democrats, saw the value in this and the importance, again, not just for the city of Charlotte, but the region. So they pushed ahead on that blue line. But one of the compromises was that we didn't create the rules or the land use rules that would have guided the type of equitable development that we might have wanted. So specifically on the southern spur of our blue line, just below our uptown area, which most everybody else refers to downtown, but it's actually in the center of our city, right in the middle of that hub. But just below that, what is called now South End was for a long time largely industrial, a lot of public housing, and you know what I'm getting at, the places that people see as less desirable. So what you saw was billions of dollars of investment, but very rapid gentrification and displacement. And that displacement continues and it's just kind of building out while we have companies that are literally moving in to be on the blue line. We brought in the next generation of Lowe's hardware. I can't even just say that they're a hardware store, but their new headquarters is right on the blue line. You have Honeywell that has moved right to the blue line, Lending Tree, a bunch of folks that are making investments in this blue line. That is great for the overall revenue, but it's making it unaffordable for the people that it was intended to most need and use public transportation. And that is your workforce, to those workforce level housing, to folks that are in extremely, economically affordable housing. And upon completion, not long after we finished the northern spur, we completed our transit-oriented development ordinance kind of rewrite and went through a large corrective rezoning on that. So, time will tell if we made the right adjustments to those land use policies to see the type of development that we want. And we're looking forward as we're looking at this new Silver Line, as well as other ideas around bus rapid transit, streetcars, and things like that. How can we maybe not put the cart before the horse, literally and figuratively, but what can we do now that we know that this is going to be coming down the line, but to start to set the map so that development, the community can start to plan and develop the type of city that we want around that. I'm a big fan of, like I said earlier, also exploring, all right, how can we put restorative and reparative policies in those future land use policies, right? Because a very popular conversation right now is reparations, specifically for Black people here in the American South. I know that might be different in different parts of the country, but I certainly believe, especially in our form of government, that transportation investment is the place where cities, municipalities really can have the most direct influence. Otherwise, we're waiting on the market, to provide opportunities to give back. This is the place where we're going to have 26 contiguous miles of dirt that we are going to be able to mandate in one form or the other. I know there are many different regulations. It's not as cut and dry as that. But I think the corridors where these rails will be laid down are those neighborhoods that were cut off during urban renewal. So not only is it an opportunity, I think it's our duty, to acknowledge and correct the errors of our policies of the past. So it'll be interesting to see how we continue to learn from the mistakes that we've made, while also, reaping the benefits of the investments that we made that continues to add to the bottom line and growth of our city.
For sure. Just to add to those, for us, we're in an interesting position as the city of Mesa, where the light rail line currently has had a positive effect in our downtown areas in Phoenix and Tempe and the city of Mesa, in bringing up, development to those cores that for a bunch of downtowns across the country have had, over the last several decades, a downturn based on the market factors and, online and all those things, where these downtowns have always in the past been a core, economic driver for a lot of cities, but most recently have been kind of on a downturn. And so the light rail has really provided a boost for these downtowns in creating activity and creating development. But I think you hit it where, we have to be conscious on the types of developments moving forward. And when I say the city of Mesa is in I think a good time where we can really define the movement, where we've seen much of the line, as you mentioned in Charlotte, much of the line was constructed in pieces for us. And then the city of Mesa was kind of on the later phase of the lines. We just received about a 2 mile, 3 mile extension in our city further east in the last couple of years. And so that for us has really created some conversations on how, as we look at density, as we look the other examples of the other cities where they've increased density, they increase, activity. For us, we're in those stages now as it comes down the line, and these developers are looking into how they can create some housing and some other opportunities along the line. For us, we're going to have to figure out a good balance on how do we central, small businesses on the line? How do we central, those working families that lived in these areas and still do, and how they can utilize this line moving forward, and how, as this line keeps on being developed, how do we utilize that line to connect other parts of the city through other, not a metro line, but other, streetcar, or, how do you interplay with the autonomous vehicles, or, neighborhood connectors and those things. That's going to be an important aspect on how do we leverage that metro line into other neighborhoods that can interconnect with each other, right? So we just don't see it as a 20+ mile line. We need to figure out, like, how do we leverage that line to other aspects of transportation options that we can create with our communities and our residents to get where they need to be at, right? So that's going to be important. Figuring out that balance is not going to be easy, but we have to do it. And looking at options of workforce housing, and looking at, small business central through that, mom and pop stores that have been in our downtown or along where this developments happen for generations, right? And ensuring that they have a place in that community.
Can you talk to me real quick about density? Because when I think of Arizona, I don't think about the most dense place in the world. I think of it as the southwest part of the country, very spread out. But you have mentioned these multiple cities that are already connected by rail. While there is some resistance in part of your region, as you said, there also seems to be a wide acceptance, just anecdotally from what you're telling me. Are you dense? How does that work? How does that affect, and I guess the other thing I would ask, do you have like regional transit lines, commuter rail or Amtrak connections that work with the light rail and streetcars and things like that?
So I'll answer it in parts because we're still a sprawling community, right? The density that I mentioned has really come into the development of this metro line for the most part the last 20 years now. I think in the urban cores, you're seeing that development go up now based on the investments that we made in transit through the city of Phoenix, city of Tempe, and now hopefully city of Mesa, and how we develop moving forward. Metro line has really allowed us to think about density in a different way in adding to those urban cores. But we're still a sprawling community. You have a lot of our neighborhoods with large lots throughout the city and throughout the region. And so that's still how the previous officials laid out the city, right? Like it was meant to kind of be a sprawling area. But I think we've been seeing some changes to that thought and how, because it's just not sustainable as we look at land use and infrastructure, especially as a city. It costs a lot to invest in that type of infrastructure. You're talking about water treatment plants that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build. And it's not just you're building it, but you have to maintain it forever, right? And once you build a water treatment plants and infrastructure and sewer pipes and roads and everything, it's not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year process. It's a forever process that cities have to think about on how you pay for that, because no one wants to have water shut off from their house, right? And so that sprawl for us is leading us to rethink on how we build in these urban cores as a city and as a region. And transit is playing a big part of that rethinking and that conversation. And how do we build these older parts of town, mostly, at least for us in the city of Mesa, and for other parts of the region that have the metro line. But how do we build those areas in providing the services and the options for folks to live in these areas that then they can do what they need to do to live, right? So it's a work in progress, I would say. The thought of Western cities, being dense, it's not there yet, but I think the sustainability of our land use is just coming to a head, right? We just have a finite amount of resources, water, right? It's 116 degrees today, and it's just, the water evaporates quickly when it's that temperature. And so as we look at the future, we need to be creating strategies that are sustainable for our residents, for my kids, right? Who are, 11, 9, and 4 years old. They need to have a community and a neighborhood and a society that has these investments that will be long lasting and not, be in trouble in the future. And so, and to your question around if we have other, Amtrak, we don't have many of those options. And so that's why, building out these other extensions on how do we leverage the current transit options that we have around bus and light rail and other programs is going to be important for us as people will be still living out in the parts where transit options are not as close. So we need to think about how do we connect those individuals back to the urban cores that we hope will have a lot of options moving forward. And so that's the work that right now that we need to have, and how do we build those strategies to have enough resources to make those types of investments moving forward.
I'm over here smiling because, I said earlier, I really kind of tried to make my platform when I first ran really encapsulate, what I thought was a formula to deal with the underlying issues that were presented in the uprising. And I thought we did a great job. But then, the first 2 months that I get in the office, I'm over here focusing on dealing with and learning about stormwater investments for the first 2 months. That was like the first major policy decision that we had to decide on, and really kind of wrapping your brain about, learning about equity issues, that relate to the ability to, in your case, to have water present, or in our case, or in anybody's case, in a southeastern metropolis, where is that water going to go? You don't realize until you get into the positions like ours about how interconnected all of these issues are. And of course, when you're talking about stormwater, you're talking about impervious runoff, and that relates to all types of investments, particularly transportation investments, right? Because you're creating all of that runoff when you build roads, when you build rails and other types of infrastructure. So, that was one of the most surprising things to me when I first got on. And, I've really enjoyed, the thing I love most about being a council member, particularly an at-large council member, is that I can go anywhere in the city and work or ask questions or learn about so many different parts of what makes a city run, and being able to correlate the effect of being able to catch a bus or get somewhere in a reasonable amount of time, and the ability to hold a job, and the ability to therefore have an affordable and safe and secure place to live, or the ability to go to school. I don't think that those kinds of second and third degree relationships, I don't think that's something that I necessarily thought of all the time when considering this work. Did you feel anything like that similar how long have you been on council?
So I was appointed in 2017. So I've been almost 4 years, 3.5 years, and just got reelected for another 4-year term. And for me, I do represent a district, so we're district based, and I do represent the west part of the district where it's, like I mentioned, it's a little bit more diverse. It's more inner city, older infrastructure. It's been hard hit in the economic recessions that we've had, and so we have like old abandoned malls and those things. So as I entered my experience, both professionally and my lived experience, as I traveled and volunteered in different activities, I had a frame of what the types of kind of issues that I felt passionate and wanted to delve into, like you said, but same thing, right? As far as, planning and zoning codes, water treatment plants, the nitty gritty of infrastructure, of how that is so important in how a city needs to maintain and create. It's so important on how we live our daily lives that, has brought to me my attention. The moment that you wake up, you start utilizing those resources that a city has to be planning and ensuring, from you flushing, the toilet to, opening the water tap, to stepping outside and driving on the roads in your neighborhood, seeing the street lights, all these items that interplay with each other. Local government, it's so important in having a good strategic plan and thoughtfulness on how that works together with residents and how they live in these communities, right? So that's going to be, for me, I keep on learning, being in these meetings with staff and residents and other folks. It's just a learning experience, listening, and how then we create strategies to broaden our impact in a positive way for our current community, but also future communities as we look forward.
Stormwater, then it was a sidewalk ordinance.
Yeah.
I mean, setbacks and planter strips. I mean, I'd never been so thrilled.
Yeah, retention basins, and it's definitely was an eye-opening, those types of things, right? That you didn't even notice when you're just walking or driving. Right. Now I notice every retention basin that when I go to work in my office or go back home, every manhole cover or street light, it's all honed in now, and just keeps me thinking on how we can create, maintain infrastructure and build new infrastructure for our neighborhoods. So I think we're coming to an end. Last question. What do you think the future post-pandemic looks like? What role does transit play into that, council member? As in the last 5.5, 6 months now, I forget how many months now, part of quarantining and pandemic has affected everybody's lives and how we navigate through our lives at the current moment. What do you think the future proposes for us as we look forward in our respective cities?
Yeah, like you said, what is time anymore? 6 months, 2 weeks, weekends, Monday, whatever's on the calendar, right?
Yep.
So I think, I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic about the future of cities, the future of where we go from dealing with this pandemic. If you look at what happened after the last pandemic, the whole world changed. That really did affect the flu of 1918. It changed the world. It changed the way we go about doing things. Literally money was very different. We were still like on the gold standard. So a whole concept of the way the world worked was quite different. That I think you'll see, in combination with other aspects of culture, the need, that drew the world to become more global, right? To rely on a more international supply chains. But there were also kind of negative things that come out of the 20th century in terms of the way cities are developed, right? Like I said, I'm from New York City. So you really start to see that kind of Robert Moses edict, right? Of using transportation planning and development to cut neighborhoods off, to move people from these work centers through these neighborhoods that they don't want to see into these suburbs. And we are paying the price, both the price, but also reaping the growth that those kind of mindsets and the way cities developed after that So I think what this pandemic is showing is that government can be nimble when forced to be. We can turn these battleships pretty quick and start to reimagine what our cities look like. I hope that this is the opportunity that we say that, we need to reverse that kind of Moses thinking and use transportation and transit to create not just seamless neighborhoods, but seamless regions that allow people to move to the places that they need to get to safely. We are going to have to figure out how to exist with this virus in the immediate and the long term. There will be things that will change forever. The way people get their things, the way people feed their family, literally, by, where their food is coming from or where they're going to get food. Also, the way work happens. Yes, we will do a lot of things from home, but we know also that this is not a sufficient way that we're doing it right now. We will need neighborhoods that are able to do things in a socially distant fashion. So I mentioned earlier that sidewalk ordinance that we went into. Well, in certain neighborhoods, you literally can't socially distance if you're walking from your home to the bus stop, or to school or to work, if your sidewalk is 3 feet wide, So we are going to have to not look at investments in transportation and transit infrastructure as an added value, but a necessary value. And we're going to have to do things in a reliable fashion, right? So how do you make sure that your trains are socially distanced? You make sure that they have the capacity where we might not be thinking necessarily of peaks, but sort of constant flows, because we might have to reimagine how the workday looks or the school day looks. We can use development and we can use this pandemic as both a carrot and a stick to imagine the types of cities and transportation networks that we want and deserve.
Yeah, just to add, I think the pandemic really put into focus how much folks need public transportation. Our essential workers, right? Our grocery workers, our restaurant workers that were been pushed back to work in our restaurants, and how much those individuals need a connected network of transportation options to get to work as individuals go back to school, in a safe way, hopefully. Students that need public transportations to go to school. It heightened that responsibility of us as elected leaders to figure out, ways on maintaining that people are safe when they're utilizing these public options, but how do we expand those networks to include more individuals moving forward? And so I think that's going to be a critical way, using, smart technology initiatives that, as technology grows in our cities, how people are connected to, those technology systems. And as I mentioned before in a previous comment, is, autonomous vehicles. I think here in the metro area, in the Phoenix metro area, we've seen a growth in autonomous vehicles. Companies like Waymo and Uber and others testing autonomous vehicles all throughout our county, and how that is changing transportation systems. For a while we saw those e-bikes and scooters throughout our cities, how those play into those transportation options. So I think everything is on the table on how we bring about positive solutions for our residents and connect them to places that they need to be at, so that they can make a living and live in neighborhoods that they live in and can grow and prosper in. So,
well, you mentioned. I think one of the things we're not going to be able to probably get much time to talk about, but the kind of elephant in the room of some of those technologies that you're talking about is the digital divide.
Yep.
And the need to bridge that. And I think the potential for a correlation between investments in transit and transportation and the ability to bridge the digital divide while that dirt is being torn up. I think that if we are able to really connect those two, I think that's going to be a big difference maker, right? In the short, long, and medium term. What this is highlighting is that, there are areas that are just completely cut off and not able to do these things. So, when you're looking at connecting rural places, well, you might not look at necessarily a light rail, but how can you co-opt investments in highways and interstates that are happening right now, while also in cities like ours, where in the west side of Charlotte, It's up to 40% of homes don't have access to broadband internet right now. Well, if our silver line is going to be going through there, well, I hope, again, as we're looking at these restorative policies, that we're making sure that broadband is getting laid down around there. How can buses help to maintain public connectivity and amplify Wi-Fi signals throughout towns and cities and so on and so forth? So I hope that's something that we really, the smarter people than you and I are able to figure out how to make happen, because that will also reduce costs, right? Digging holes costs a lot of money when you dig a lot of them. So hopefully the pandemic will amplify some of that work.
Nice to meet you, council member. Good luck moving forward.
Glad to have this conversation. Hopefully we can have more of it in the future.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks you all for that great discussion. We really appreciate that. I'm glad that they were able to get on the Rail Volution podcast. I'm glad that we were able to share it here as well. I wanted to say also this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up every month during the pandemic, which is awesome. We're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you your own bus-only scarf. I've been thinking about some more reward tiers as well. We also have bonus materials on the Patreon website. I've been meaning to post the most recent one with Chuck Wolf coming up. And then we also have done one with Zabe Bent, who is coming on the show in a couple of weeks to Talking Headways for bonus materials. So, and that one's fun. We talk about time travel and things like that. So we're going to have a few new things this month. Hopefully I'll get 2 of those posted up on the Patreon page. But please go on and support the Patreon page so we can keep on doing the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. Also, I want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice. And if you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com. That book was super fun to produce. That fun was super to produce as well. And if you're a history of planning fan, it's the very first one listed on the American Planning Association's 100 Essential Books of Planning. So go check that out if you get a chance. Listener questions and comments. So we do have a listener question, but I'm going to wait until Chrissy comes back so that we can answer both of us to the commenter. So we'll be back hopefully in 2 weeks talking about that, and I'm looking forward to that. So we'll have a question. Also, if you want a comment or question, feel free to tweet at us on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. But if you want to, feel free to email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Sorry, I'm a little stuttery today. Trying to go and too fast. too fast. And finally, Pub Reads and Butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. I think last time I talked about Taskmaster. Definitely go check that out if you get a chance. Watching all the soccer this summer has also been really great. I'm looking forward to the Gold Cup, which USA played last night. Argentina won with Messi, and Messi is one of my favorite players, of the playing generation that is happening now. So that was really fun. I felt really bad for the England penalty kick takers. Those young guys, we got to build those guys up. Obviously they're professionals and they should be able to take it, but they shouldn't be taking any of the racial abuse that they're getting. And also it's, I know it's serious and I know people really care about these things, but it also is just a game. It's just something that we can lift our spirits during tough times. And, England, hats off to England because they had a great tournament. It was the furthest they'd gotten in a really long time. I think their coach did a really great job. And so, we should, if you're in England and you're a soccer fan or a football fan, I should say, give them some praise. And also, obviously big praise to Italy. Italy is obviously one of my favorite teams. I have ancestral connection to Italy, so I really appreciate that as well. I remember watching the I think it was the 2006 World Cup, and they went to penalty kicks in the final, and that was really fun to watch them win. So, one of those things where they missed the World Cup a couple of years ago, and now they're back and winning the European Championship, I think was a big win for them, and I think that's that they were probably the best team of the tournament. Anyways, soccer talk. Super fun. I love soccer. I love football. It's one of my first loves, even before running. So people can find me online on Twitter at The Overhead Wire, at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreons for sponsoring this week's podcast. And thank you for Francisco and Braxton for having that wonderful discussion. And we'll see you next time.
Talking